Struggling single mom falls asleep on a CEO's shoulder on a bus, but wakes up shocked. The alarm buzzed at 5 o'clock in the morning, pulling Emily Carter out of the brief, restless sleep she had managed to steal. Her small, cluttered apartment in Queens was silent except for the soft hum of the city waking up beyond the thin walls. Her 6-year-old son, Noah, was still asleep, curled up under a worn Spider-Man blanket that had seen better days. Emily stood quietly, watching him for a moment, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Her heart ached with the weight of the life they were living, always racing, always surviving, never thriving. She tiptoed to the kitchenette and made herself the cheapest instant coffee she could afford. It tasted like burnt water, but it was warm, and right now, warmth was a luxury. Her second job at the bakery had ended only 3 hours ago, but now it was time for job number 1, a part-time office cleaner downtown. With overdue rent notices piling on the counter and Noah's school needing fees she could no longer ignore, there was no choice but to push through. By 6 o'clock in the morning, she had dressed Noah, packed him a lunch, half a peanut butter sandwich and some apple slices, and walked him to Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor who agreed to watch him for a few dollars a day. Noah's tiny hand gripped hers tightly as they walked down the cracked sidewalk. "Are you going to be okay, Mommy?" he asked with the kind of worry no child should ever carry. "I'm always okay, buddy." She lied with a smile, kneeling to hug him tight. "Yeah. Be good today." With a kiss on his forehead, she forced herself to walk away before the tears brimmed over. There was no time for weakness. At the bus stop, the crowd was thicker than usual. Monday mornings were always brutal, but today felt worse. Emily squeezed herself onto the packed bus when it arrived, grateful for the small mercy of an empty seat in the very back. As soon as she sat down, her eyelids grew heavier. Her body begged for rest. Her head dipped slightly forward, then jolted back up. She needed to stay awake. Only 27 blocks. She could make it. Except she could not. Halfway through Midtown, exhaustion swallowed her whole. Her head tilted sideways without her noticing, finding an unexpected pillow, the shoulder of the man sitting beside her. She was completely unaware that the man was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, a silver watch gleaming under the cuff, holding a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His name was Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Tech, one of the most powerful tech companies in New York City. Alexander was reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet, his focus absolute, until he felt a sudden weight press against his arm. He glanced sideways, his sharp blue eyes narrowing slightly. A woman. Her head had fallen gently onto his shoulder, her breathing deep, steady, vulnerable. For a second, he considered shifting, waking her. But as he looked closer, something stopped him. Her face was drawn, pale, tired in a way that spoke of a kind of exhaustion he rarely saw in his world of boardrooms and luxury. She clutched a cheap fabric purse to her chest like it contained everything important in her life. Stray strands of chestnut hair framed her delicate features, and the smallest frown furrowed her brow even in sleep. He exhaled, adjusting slightly but letting her stay. A few stops later, as the jostling bus made a sudden turn, Emily stirred. Her eyes blinked open. Slowly, confusion registering before full realization hit her like a bolt. Her head was on someone's shoulder, a stranger's. Her face flushed crimson as she sat upright instantly. I am so sorry," she stammered, brushing her hair back, her hands trembling. I did not mean." "It is fine." Alexander interrupted, his tone surprisingly soft, void of the annoyance she expected. "You were exhausted." Emily's mouth opened but no words came out. Her experience with men in suits was limited to being ignored by them when handing over coffee orders or wiping down their office floors. None had ever spoken to her like a person. "Are you okay?" he asked suddenly, turning slightly toward her. "The weight of the world. You look like you are carrying." She blinked at him. No one had asked her that in years. Maybe ever. I am fine." She managed, defaulting to the answer she always gave. Her eyes dropped to her lap, searching for something to fiddle with, desperate to make herself invisible again. The bus slowed to a stop. "This is me," she blurted, standing so fast she nearly tripped. She clutched her purse, avoiding his gaze, and darted toward the door. Alexander watched her leave, expecting that to be the end of the encounter. Just a stranger on a bus. A tired woman whose life would soon fade back into the background noise of the city. Except as the bus pulled away, he glanced down at the seat beside him and noticed something. A small, worn leather wallet. Her wallet. And just like that, Alexander Reed's morning, and perhaps his life, took a sharp turn in a direction he never saw coming. The morning sun had risen higher over the skyline of New York City, casting golden hues on the glass buildings and bustling streets. Alexander Reed stepped off the bus, wallet in hand, his mind unusually distracted. Normally, his thoughts at this hour revolved around investment strategies, merger negotiations, and deadlines stacked higher than the skyscrapers surrounding him. But today, none of those things held his focus. Instead, the image of the woman who had unintentionally fallen asleep on his shoulder lingered stubbornly. The wallet was worn, the leather cracked at the corners. It was small, the kind designed to fit inside a purse rather than a pocket. As he walked toward his office building, curiosity got the better of him. He opened it carefully, not to invade privacy, but to find any information that would allow him to return it. Inside was a faded driver's license that read Emily Carter. Tucked behind the ID was a photo, her and a small boy with bright eyes and an infectious smile. The boy looked about 6 years old, his arms wrapped tightly around her neck, both of them laughing in a way that felt almost painful to look at. Happiness captured in a photograph, contrasting so sharply with the exhaustion he had seen on her face that morning. Behind the photo were receipts. Grocery bills with small totals, suggesting a careful shopper. Counting every cent. A pink slip from a landlord's office stamped with the words, "Final Notice," in bold red letters. A handwritten note, barely legible, listing job interview times with some crossed out. One caught his eye, cafe job, interview failed. Another. Office cleaning, accepted. Another line read simply, pay electric bill before Thursday. Alexander closed the wallet and exhaled slowly. In his world, problems came with price tags. He was a man accustomed to fixing things with contracts, lawyers, and wires transferring obscene amounts of money with a few clicks. But this was a different kind of problem. This was survival. His polished leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the marble floor of Reed Teka's lobby as he entered. The receptionist greeted him with a cheerful smile that he barely noticed. Nodding absent-mindedly, he made his way to the executive elevator, his fingers tightening around the wallet. As the elevator doors slid shut, the image of Emily's face haunted him again, her startled expression when she woke, her hurried apology, the weight in her eyes. The elevator opened directly into the executive floor, where glass walls provided a panoramic view of Manhattan. His assistant, Claire, was already waiting, tablet in hand, ready to brief him on the day's meetings. Her voice was brisk, efficient. "Morning, Alexander. First on the agenda, the expansion project. Legal needs your sign-off on the Midtown property lease. After that, the board is expecting an update on the subsidiary crisis." "Hold on," he interrupted, lifting a hand. "Push the Midtown briefing back an hour." Claire blinked. "An hour? But the legal team." "Just do it," he said, his tone final. "I need to step out for something." Without further explanation, he turned on his heel, heading back toward the private entrance. The wallet was still in his pocket, heavier now than it had any right to be. Outside, the morning rush had thinned slightly, but New York never really slowed down. Alexander opened his phone's map app, inputting the address listed on Emily's ID. Queens. Not far, but not close either. Most of his world operated within a sleek radius of Manhattan's financial heart. Queens felt like an entirely different universe, one with cracked sidewalks, corner bodegas, and apartment buildings where elevators were a luxury. As his town car glided through traffic, he stared out the window, his mind turning over questions he was not sure he had the right to ask. Who was she beyond what the wallet revealed? How did someone like her end up sitting next to someone like him, if only by accident? And why was he bothering to care at all? The car pulled up to a narrow brick building with peeling paint and crooked window blinds. He stepped out, smoothing his suit jacket, feeling oddly out of place. A few children kicked a soccer ball in the street. An elderly man sat on the stoop, smoking, eyeing Alexander with cautious curiosity. No concierge here. No security desk. Just a row of mailboxes, most of them dented or missing numbers. He scanned the names until he found it. E. Carter. Apartment 3B. Taking a deep breath, he climbed the narrow staircase, each step creaking underfoot. The hallway smelled of old carpet, dust, and faint traces of someone cooking bacon in another unit. He reached her door and raised his hand to knock but hesitated. This was absurd. CEOs did not chase after women from city buses to return wallets. They sent assistants. They couriered things. They delegated. And yet, he knocked. A few moments passed. Then footsteps. The door opened just a crack, the chain still latched. "Hello." Her voice was wary, guarded. Alexander took a small step back, not wanting to appear threatening. Offering a smile that felt more genuine than any he had worn in a while. "Emily Carter?" he asked. "I believe you lost this." He held up the wallet between two fingers. The door opened wider, the chain rattling as she removed it. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. Her hair was pulled back messily, dark circles under her eyes even deeper in the daylight. She wore an oversized sweatshirt, probably something thrown on in haste. "Oh my God. I did not even realize." She stepped forward, taking the wallet from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. I cannot believe you brought this all the way here." She stammered. Most people would have, just left it. You didn't have. Most people might. Alexander replied quietly. But I am not most people. Her brows furrowed, her instincts kicking in. Why? I mean, thank you, obviously, but why? He considered lying, saying it was just the right thing to do, pretending it was nothing. But something about the raw honesty in her eyes made him choose differently. I was curious, he admitted. You looked like someone who has a story worth knowing. Emily crossed her arms, half defensive, half suspicious. Well, curiosity satisfied. I am just someone who fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder because she is bad at being awake when working 2 jobs and raising a kid. He smiled, unexpectedly. I figured it might be something like that. As if on cue, a small voice echoed from inside the apartment. Mommy? Who is it? Emily turned, calling over her shoulder. It is fine, baby. Just, someone returning something. Alexander tilted his head slightly. Noah? Her eyes snapped back to his, surprised. How do you? He gestured to the wallet. There is a picture. I assume that is him. Her posture softened slightly but remained guarded. Yeah, that is him. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy but not entirely uncomfortable. Alexander glanced down the hallway, then back at her. I should go, he said finally. But I am glad I came. Emily nodded, fingers tightening around the wallet as though it were a lifeline. And, thank you. Really? Yeah, me too. As he turned to leave, she stood there watching him, puzzled, conflicted, wondering why a man in a suit, a man from a world so different from hers, had bothered to step into hers at all. Neither of them knew it yet, but this brief, unlikely encounter was only the beginning. The next morning arrived faster than Emily had hoped. Her body ached as though she had been hauling bricks all night rather than attempting to snatch a few fleeting hours of sleep. The alarm blared mercilessly at 6 o'clock in the morning, dragging her from a shallow, unrestful dream. That faded the moment her eyes opened. Her mind instantly raced through the checklist of survival, Noah's school lunch, Mrs. Jenkins to babysit, bus fare, and whether her employer at the cafe would be in one of his foul moods again. Her thoughts, however, were quickly hijacked by the memory that played on an endless loop. Since the day before, falling asleep on that stranger's shoulder. Not just any stranger, an impeccably dressed man whose quiet confidence radiated power. She cringed, burying her face in her hands at the sheer humiliation. Her cheeks burned remembering his voice, that gentle but steady tone. You look like you are carrying the weight of the world. Those words had echoed in her mind long after the bus had pulled away. As much as she tried to push it aside, something about the encounter clung to her like static. Unwanted yet impossible to shake off. No one ever noticed her. Not the customers who snapped their fingers for coffee refills, not the managers who looked through her as if she were invisible. And certainly not men in tailored suits. And yet, somehow, this one did. She glanced at her wallet sitting on the small chipped table in the corner. Returned. He had come all the way to Queens just to return it. That simple fact was bewildering. No ulterior motive, no expectation. Just decency. It was rare enough to feel almost unsettling. Trying to shake the thoughts loose, she pulled herself together and got Noah ready. His small voice and bright smile always had a way of grounding her back to what mattered. But even as she kissed him goodbye and stepped onto the crowded bus once more, her eyes flicked toward every dark suit she passed, half expecting, or maybe half dreading, to see that same face again. But of course, he was not there. At her morning shift in the cafe, the hours dragged. Orders blurred together, Americanos, lattes, breakfast sandwiches wrapped in paper, as her hands moved on autopilot. Her manager barked about speed and customer satisfaction without once asking if she had eaten anything herself. When the bell above the door jingled, she glanced up without thinking, and froze. Standing there, as out of place in this dingy corner cafe as a diamond on the sidewalk, was Alexander Reed. No suit this time. A navy sweater layered over a crisp white shirt, dark jeans. Instead of tailored slacks, but still unmistakably him. His posture, his presence, commanding. Yet impossibly calm. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating. Her heart jolted painfully against her ribs. He scanned the room, found her behind the counter, and walked straight toward her. Emily. Instinctively wiped her hands on her apron, her throat tightening. You. She breathed out before she could stop herself. Me. He confirmed with the smallest curve of a smile. I was hoping you would be here. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. Why? I mean, what are you doing here? I wanted to check if you were all right. He replied, eyes scanning her face as if searching for something beyond the surface. And I realized I never properly introduced myself. She blinked, completely thrown. No one did this. No one came back. No one noticed her twice. Okay. She stammered. I'm Emily. Alexander. He nodded, offering a hand across the counter. His palm was warm, his grip firm. But not overwhelming. For a second longer than necessary, neither of them let go. Well, you found me. She said awkwardly, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. Busy. Working. You didn't have to come all the way here just to check. I'm alive. I know. He said simply. But I wanted to. Her mind raced, trying to decipher the meaning behind that. There was no logical explanation. Men like him didn't just show up in lives like hers unless there was a problem to solve or a debt to collect. But here he was, standing in front of her, hands casually tucked into his pockets, with no sign of arrogance or pity, just genuine presence. A customer coughed behind him, reminding her that she was still on the clock. Flustered, Emily tore her gaze away and forced her hands back to the register. Can I get you something? She asked, forcing professionalism into her voice. Black coffee. Nothing fancy. She nodded, relieved to have something to do, something physical to anchor her in reality. As she filled the cup, her hands still trembled slightly. When she handed it over, he took it with a thank you, then gestured toward one of the corner tables. Do you mind if I sit? Her eyebrows shot up. Here. Unless that's a problem. It's not a problem. I guess. She mumbled, not quite believing what was happening. Just, not exactly the kind of place for you. It's. He chuckled softly. I think it's exactly the kind of place today calls for. As he settled into the seat, Emily fought the urge to stare. She had seen men like him in glossy magazines, in boardrooms she cleaned after hours, on TV screens announcing mergers and acquisitions. But never sitting in a cracked vinyl booth in a worn-down cafe like this, sipping basic coffee and watching her with the same attention someone might give a masterpiece. Painting. Minutes passed in silence, interrupted only by the occasional hiss of the espresso machine and the clatter of plates. Her coworker, Gina, shot her a curious glance, mouthing a dramatic, "Who is that?" Emily pretended not to notice. When her break finally rolled around, she hesitated for only a second before grabbing her mug and sliding into the seat across from him. I don't get it. She said honestly, folding her hands around the warm ceramic. Here. Why are you? His gaze softened. Because I think, you are someone who deserves to be seen. And I don't think that happens often enough for you. The words hit harder than they should. For a moment, Emily had to look away, blinking fast. You don't know anything about me. Not yet. He agreed, leaning slightly forward. But I'd like to. A sharp laugh escaped her, edged with disbelief. You're gonna find some inspiring underdog story? A cautionary tale? Yeah. And why is that? What do you think? No. He answered, completely unfazed. I think I might find someone with more strength than most people I've ever met. Someone who knows how to survive when the world refuses to help. Emily opened her mouth, ready to fire back something sarcastic, but the words tangled and died in her throat. She was used to being invisible, to people passing by without even noticing the shadow she left behind. But right now, with Alexander Reed sitting across from her, eyes steady and kind, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Visible. Real. For the first time in a long time, someone saw her. Not as a server, not as a struggling single mom, not as a faceless extra in someone else's story, but as herself. And it terrified her. The next day, the relentless pace of the city resumed without mercy, swallowing Emily once more into the grind she had grown painfully accustomed to. Despite the surreal encounter with Alexander, her reality remained unchanged. Rent was still due. Bills still piled up. Noah still needed shoes that did not have holes in them, and her job still drained every ounce of her energy. Moments of magic, like someone noticing her existence, were fleeting, and dangerously distracting. She tried her best to forget the conversation from the day before. Forget the strange kindness in his gaze. Forget how, for one terrifying moment, it had felt like someone might actually care. People like him did not belong in her world. She had learned that the hard way more times than she could count. Men in suits might flash smiles, pretend to notice, pretend to care, but in the end, their lives moved on. Hers did not. Still, even as she swept floors, scrubbed tables, and smiled at customers who never once looked her in the eye, a part of her mind kept replaying his words. I think you are someone who deserves to be seen. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not once. That afternoon, while taking inventory in the cafe's cramped supply room, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated but answered. Hello. Emily. It is Alexander. For a moment, her heart stopped. His voice, smooth and confident, felt entirely out of place. Echoing through her cheap plastic phone. How did you? You mentioned the name of this cafe when we spoke. Finding your number was not difficult. A rush of confusion, suspicion, and a flicker of something dangerously close to hope surged all at once. Why are you calling? I have been thinking. He said, his tone direct but not imposing. Something that could help both of us. I have a proposition. Her stomach twisted. A proposition? I would like to discuss it in person. Are you free after your shift? Her instincts screamed. Every fiber of her being braced for disappointment, for strings attached. For some cruel joke dressed up as charity. Her voice sharpened, defensive. Listen, I do not need charity. I do not need some rich guy feeling good about himself by Emily. He interrupted, calm but firm. More than qualified for. It is not charity. It is an opportunity. One I believe you are. The words left her stunned. No one had ever used the word qualified when referring to her. Not in years. Maybe ever. I do not know. She stammered. Just meet me. No obligations. No expectations. Just a conversation. Her mouth opened, ready to decline, but what came out instead was, fine. Where? They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop a few blocks away, neutral territory, as far from luxury boardrooms as possible. After hanging up, Emily stood frozen for a long moment, phone still in her hand, unsure whether to feel terrified, excited, or foolish for agreeing. When her shift finally ended, she walked toward the meeting spot, her worn sneakers slapping against the pavement, her pulse hammering in her ears. The tiny coffee shop was nearly empty when she pushed open the door. And there he was, seated at a corner table, sleeves rolled up, fingers tapping against a ceramic mug. Alexander looked up and smiled, standing to greet her as if she were someone important. Someone worth standing for. She hated how that simple gesture made something squeeze painfully in her chest. "Thank you for coming," he said. She crossed her arms, keeping her distance. "I still do not know why I am here. I will get straight to the point," he said, sliding a folder across the table toward her. "There is an opening at one of my company's branches. A management-level position. The role is challenging. High stress. High responsibility. The previous person quit because the situation is less than ideal." Her eyes widened. "Wait. Are you offering me a job? An interview?" He corrected, though his tone suggested the outcome was more certain than not. "If you are interested." Her laughter was sharp, bitter. "I do not belong in your world. I do not have a college degree. I have no corporate experience." "You are wrong," he said without missing a beat. "I have reviewed the branch's needs. They do not require another MBA with no real-world skills. They need someone who knows how to solve problems when resources are limited. Someone who knows how to manage chaos. Someone resilient. Someone like you." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "This is insane." "Is it?" he countered. "You run a household on practically nothing. You manage schedules, budgets, emergencies. You negotiate. You multitask. You make impossible decisions every day. What do you think management is?" Her lips parted, but no response came. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was impossible, absurd, unreal. But another part, buried deep beneath years of disappointment, whispered, "What if?" "Why me?" she asked quietly. He folded his hands, gaze steady. "Because when you fell asleep on my shoulder, I realized something. People like you, people who fight this hard every day just to survive, have skills no resume can capture. My company needs that. And frankly, the world needs to stop overlooking people like you." Her throat tightened, and she hated how close she was to crying in public. She swallowed it down. "This feels like some kind of trap." "It is not," he said, completely sincere. "Interview is yours. But the choice is yours. No pressure. If you want it, She stared at the folder like it might bite. Her fingers twitched, but she did not reach for it. "Not yet. I need to think," she said finally. "Of course." He stood, gathering his coat. "You decide to proceed. My assistant will call you tomorrow with the details if." As he turned to leave, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "I believe in you. Even if you do not yet. For what it is worth, Emily." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with nothing but a folder, a million doubts, and the terrifying, fragile possibility that for the first time in a very long time, something might actually change. The folder sat on Emily's kitchen table for hours, untouched but impossible to ignore. It loomed Like a foreign object in a space that was otherwise filled with reminders of her reality, a chipped coffee mug, a pile of overdue bills, Noah's art projects tacked to the peeling walls, and the unmistakable hum of an old refrigerator that might give out any day. It did not belong here. This pristine folder embossed with the sleek logo of Reed Tech, a symbol of a world that had never once opened its doors to someone like her. Noah played quietly in the corner, lining up toy cars he had collected from garage sales and discount bins. Occasionally, he glanced over at her, sensing that something was different, though he was too young to name it. Emily sat at the table, elbows propped up, chin resting on her hands, staring at the folder like it might explode if she touched it. She had told herself she would not open it. That it was pointless. That even entertaining the thought of stepping into Alexander's world was reckless. Dangerous. Foolish. But as the minutes stretched into hours, curiosity chipped away at the protective wall of cynicism she had spent years building. Finally, with a sigh heavy enough to shake her bones, she reached out and flipped it open. The first page was a detailed job description. Branch Operations Manager. Responsibilities included overseeing daily operations, managing a team of 20 employees, coordinating logistics, handling customer service escalations, and ensuring financial targets were met. Her eyes widened at the salary line. It was more money than she had ever made in a year, almost double what her two jobs combined barely provided. Beneath the job description were reports, pages and pages of them. Financial statements from the struggling branch Alexander had mentioned. She scanned line after line, noticing patterns almost instinctively. Inventory mismanagement, staff turnover, customer complaints left unresolved, equipment orders duplicated unnecessarily, late fees stacking up from unpaid vendor invoices. Without realizing it, her mind began solving problems. That order should have been cancelled. That staff schedule is a disaster. No wonder they are over budget. Whoever is doing this has no idea how to prioritize expenses. She flipped to the next page, which listed a summary of operational challenges. A scribbled note in the margin caught her eye, likely Alexander's handwriting. Problem isn't resources. Problem is leadership. A shaky laugh escaped her lips. Leadership. The word felt foreign, absurd even, when applied to her. And yet, as she read further, she began to realize that the chaos in those reports mirrored the chaos of her own life, the constant juggling, the crises, the need to stretch every dollar and every minute. If anything, she had been running a miniature version of this disaster for years. Only her version was called survival. Her fingers brushed over the final page. A printed note, not formal like the others. A personal message. I know this looks impossible. That is why I believe you are exactly the person for it. Her throat tightened. She sat back, pressing a fist to her mouth, willing herself not to cry. Because crying would mean admitting that a part of her, the part she thought was long dead, wanted this desperately. Noah wandered over, climbing into her lap. Mommy, why do you look sad? She wrapped her arms around him, breathing in the comforting smell of peanut butter and crayons. I am not sad, buddy. Just thinking. About what? She kissed the top of his head. Something big. About whether it is okay to try something really scary. He tilted his head, considering this in the innocent way only a child could. Makes you happy? Is it something that? Her eyes stung. I don't know yet. Then you should try. If it makes you happy, it is good. If it doesn't, we can just have pancakes. A soft laugh bubbled out of her. Simple. Pure. Trusting. Only a child could believe the world was that manageable. Only a child could believe that trying wouldn't cost more than it gave. The next morning arrived like a slap. Everything that could go wrong did. Noah woke up with a low fever, complaining of a sore throat. Mrs. Jenkins, her usual babysitter, had a doctor's appointment and couldn't take him. Emily's phone buzzed constantly, a reminder from the cafe about her shift, a message from her cleaning job asking if she could come in early, and a voicemail from Claire, Alexander's assistant, confirming the interview time for that afternoon. She paced the apartment, torn between responsibility and opportunity, between the life she knew and the terrifying unknown dangling in front of her. Her gaze landed back on Noah, curled up on the couch with flushed cheeks. Panic rose in her chest. She couldn't leave him sick. But canceling the interview felt like slamming a door that might never open again. She dialed the cafe. The manager answered, his voice already annoyed. Before he could complain, she said it first. "I'm sorry, I can't come in today. My son's sick." "You've gotta be kidding me." He snapped. "Emily, this is the third time this month." "I know, don't bother coming back tomorrow." Her mouth went dry. "Wait. Are you firing me? Find someone else to cover. I'm done." The line went dead. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the phone like it might burst into flames. The weight of it was suffocating. The job had been miserable, long hours, terrible pay, constant disrespect, but it had been something. Now, it was gone. She sat down heavily, fingers trembling. The tightrope she had walked for so long had finally snapped. A familiar knot of dread formed in her stomach. Rent. Utilities. Food. Noah's school supplies. Without that job, everything spiraled even faster toward collapse. Her eyes flicked back to the folder. The ridiculous, impossible folder. What choice did she have? She picked up the phone again and called Claire back. "The interview. This is Emily Carter. I'll be there. 4. Excellent." Claire said, her tone bright and efficient. Suite 31. 2 o'clock. Reed Tech headquarters. Hanging up, Emily closed her eyes, forcing air into her lungs. This was happening. This was real. She threw on the best outfit she owned, a blouse that didn't quite fit right and slacks that were frayed at the hem. Her shoes were scuffed. Her hair refused to cooperate no matter how much she brushed it. In the mirror, she saw someone who looked like an imposter, like a child dressing up in grown-up clothes. But she straightened her shoulders anyway. Because for better or worse, she was walking through that door. The city unfolded before Emily like an overwhelming, endless machine. Her feet tapped nervously against the floor of the subway car as it rattled toward Manhattan. Her hands trembled despite being clasped tightly around the leather strap of her worn purse, knuckles widening with the pressure. Every passing second felt heavier, and every station the train passed seemed to amplify the question pounding through her mind, what am I doing? Reed Tech headquarters was a towering glass structure that reflected the city back at itself, a monument to wealth and success. As Emily stood on the sidewalk staring up at it, it felt less like a building and more like a wall separating her world from theirs. People streamed past her in tailored suits and polished shoes, checking their watches, tapping through calls, moving with the confidence of those who had never wondered where their next meal was coming from. Her fingers reached instinctively to smooth her hair, though the wind had already undone whatever attempt she had made at taming it. Her reflection in the gleaming glass doors was a painful contrast to the others entering the building. Her blouse was serviceable but clearly worn. Her pants one size too large, and her shoes scuffed from years of use. But none of that mattered now. She had told herself that 100 times, but her pulse still raced as she pushed the heavy door open. The lobby was cavernous, all marble floors, glass railings, and brushed steel. A cascading water feature murmured in the corner like a permanent whisper of luxury. The air smelled clean, in a way that made her painfully aware of the constant mustiness of her own apartment. A reception desk stood in the center, manned by a woman whose makeup was flawless and whose tailored blazer probably cost more than Emily's rent. She approached, clutching the strap of her purse tighter. "Hi. I'm here for an interview." The receptionist didn't look up from her screen. "Name?" "Emily Carter." A pause. The woman tapped something, her manicured nails clicking against the keyboard. Her perfectly lined eyebrows furrowed. "I don't see anything scheduled under that name." Emily's stomach dropped. "A clock." I was told." "Claire, Mr. Reed's assistant," she said too. The receptionist's expression didn't change. "Have the right date?" "There's nothing on the schedule." "Are you sure you?" Heat flushed up Emily's neck, her heart pounding painfully. Yes. She definitely said today." "Take a seat. I'll check." The receptionist's tone carried a sharp edge, the kind that made it clear she doubted Emily's story. Emily turned toward the row of sleek, minimalistic chairs lining the wall. Sitting felt like an act of surrender. Her knees bounced as she stared down at her hands, at the chipped nail polish, the small scar on her wrist from when she'd slipped with a knife slicing bread 2 jobs ago. All around her, people moved with purpose, executives in conversation, assistants delivering reports, interns nervously balancing coffee trays. Minutes ticked by. 10. 15. The receptionist didn't look at her again. Panic rose like a tide. Had this been some cruel mistake? Or worse, a joke? Had Alexander simply said what he thought would make him feel like a good person, throwing her a bone he never intended her to chase? She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Her instinct screamed at her to run. This wasn't her world. She didn't belong here. Just as she stood, ready to bolt before further humiliation could set in, a familiar voice echoed down the corridor. "Emily." She turned, breath catching. Alexander was striding toward her, his dark suit impeccable, but his face registered instant surprise and frustration as he took in the scene. "You're here," he said, glancing quickly toward the receptionist. His gaze hardened. "I notified she arrived." "Why wasn't?" The receptionist blinked, caught off guard. She's not in the system." Alexander's jaw tensed. "Fix it." Without waiting for a reply, he turned back to Emily, his expression softening. "Shouldn't have happened. I'm sorry. That. I didn't think. I wasn't sure." She struggled to find words as embarrassment burned through her. "You were right to doubt, but wrong to assume it was intentional," he said, offering her the smallest smile. "Come with me." He led her past the reception desk, past conference rooms where groups of sharply dressed professionals debated over presentations, past assistants typing furiously at their desks. Emily followed, still half expecting someone to stop her, to tell her she didn't belong here. They stepped into a glass-walled elevator that soared silently up the side of the building. As the city shrank beneath them, Alexander turned, studying her with a look that wasn't judgment, but concern. "I'm sorry about the mix-up," he said. "This company isn't perfect. Sometimes the systems fail. And unfortunately, sometimes the people do too." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It's fine. I almost left." "I'm glad you didn't." The elevator dinged, opening onto the executive floor. It was quieter here, more refined. Plush carpeting softened footsteps. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline. At the far end of the hallway, a set of double doors led into a spacious office that felt more like a private suite in a luxury hotel than a workspace. "This is my office," Alexander said as he opened the doors, gesturing her inside. "Be doing the interview here." "But we won't." Her brow furrowed. "We won't?" "No. I want you to see the branch where the job is. Where the real work happens." He grabbed his coat from a sleek rack near the door, then gestured toward a side entrance. "Come on." Emily followed him down a back stairwell that exited into the underground parking garage. A black SUV waited, driver already inside. The door was held open for her, and she slid in, feeling entirely out of place against the buttery leather seats. As the car pulled out into traffic, Alexander explained. "The branch you'd be managing isn't far. It's one of our smaller locations, but it's a mess. Leadership failed. Staff turnovers through the roof. Customer complaints are constant. Morale is in the gutter. No one wants to touch it." She swallowed. "And you think I can fix it?" "I don't think. I believe." The words landed heavier than they should have. She stared out the window, watching the city blur past, unsure whether to feel inspired or utterly terrified. 20 minutes later, the SUV pulled up in front of a squat gray building that stood in stark contrast to the shining tower they'd just left. The Reed Tech logo was faded, the glass entrance smudged, a line of customers already waiting impatiently by the doors. Inside, chaos was immediate. Phones rang unanswered. Employees darted back and forth, snapping at each other. Paperwork cluttered the front desk. A customer shouted from the corner about a refund, ignored by two staff members arguing over a scheduling mix-up. Alexander stood still for a moment, letting her take it in. "This," he said quietly, "is what you'd be walking into." She turned to him, pulse hammering. "It's worse than I imagined." His gaze was steady. "But not worse than what you've handled every day of your life. The only difference is, this time, you'd be getting paid for it." Emily stood frozen at the entrance of the chaotic branch, her eyes darting from the overwhelmed employees to the frustrated customers whose voices rose with each passing second. Phones rang without being answered, printers beeped in protest from paper jams no one had time to fix, and the stifling tension in the air seemed almost tangible. The place smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. She had imagined messy, but this was something entirely different. This was dysfunction barely holding itself together. Her instinct was to turn around, to step back into the comfort of the struggle she knew rather than willingly walk into a different battlefield she did not understand. But as her fingers curled tighter around the strap of her purse, she realized that the anxiety gripping her was not unfamiliar. It was the same sensation she felt every day, juggling crises at home, making impossible decisions with no resources, navigating a world that constantly dared her to fail. Alexander glanced at her, gauging her reaction carefully. "It is a lot," he acknowledged, his voice steady. "But I meant what I said. You already have more experience dealing with chaos than anyone sitting behind a desk in a corporate office." Before she could answer, the loudest voice in the room cut through the noise, a man in his late 40s, wearing a rumpled shirt with a name badge crooked on his chest. "Look, ma'am, I have told you 3 times, we cannot issue that refund today. You need to submit the form online, and someone will get back to you within 72 hours. The customer, a woman in her 60s holding a malfunctioning tablet, slammed it on the counter. "I have submitted the form 3 times. No one ever gets back to me. Your online system is broken, your phone lines are a joke, and I have been standing here for an hour while everyone ignores me." The employee sighed, turning away as though he had heard the same complaint so many times. It had lost all meaning. Emily watched, her fingers itching. It was like watching a scene from her own life, not in a corporate office, but at the grocery store, the doctor's office, the landlord's office. Places where systems failed and people like her were left to fend for themselves. Before she realized what she was doing, her feet were moving. "Excuse me," she said, stepping toward the counter. The employee barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please wait your turn. I am not a customer," she replied, voice sharper now, stronger. "I am observing." That caught his attention. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Observing? She is with me," Alexander said from behind her, his tone calm but edged with authority. "On. Carrie." The employee blinked, clearly thrown, but muttered. "Front of him." "Fine." And turned back to the screen in. Emily leaned over slightly toward the frustrated customer, lowering her voice just enough to soften the conversation. "May I see your paperwork?" The woman hesitated but handed over a crumpled folder. Emily flipped through it quickly. Forms. Printed, confirmation emails with ticket numbers, and a scribbled list of dates when the woman had called and been ignored. "The problem is not with your request," Emily said after a moment, turning toward the employee. "It is with the fact that your system does not actually escalate unresolved issues after 48 hours like your form claims." The employee opened his mouth to argue, but she continued before he could. "There is no queue management system. No clear accountability for who responds to customer complaints. And," she added, pointing to the computer, "half of your tickets are being flagged incorrectly. Because your intake forms default to the wrong service category." Alexander's lips curved ever so slightly upward as he watched her work. The employee stared, stunned. "How do you even?" "Because it is the same thing every overworked system does when it is being held together with duct tape." Emily shot back. "You are not broken. The process is." She turned back to the customer. "I cannot solve this for you today. But if you leave this tablet with me for 24 hours, I will personally ensure that it is reviewed, fixed, and returned. If that does not happen, you can report me directly." The woman stared at her, then glanced at Alexander standing silently behind her, then back at Emily. "You work here?" "Not yet," Emily answered, handing her a written note with a phone number on it. "Soon. But maybe." The customer exhaled, some of the tension leaving her face. "Holding you to it." "Okay. 24 hours. I am." When she walked away, the employee shook his head. "Who are you?" Alexander finally stepped forward. "She is the candidate for the branch manager position." The man's jaw dropped. "You are kidding." "I am not," Alexander replied smoothly. "In fact, I believe she is exactly what this place needs." Emily flushed, but whether it was from embarrassment or a strange swell of pride, she could not tell. The rest of the tour was no less chaotic. Broken equipment, mismatched inventory, and Frustrated employees were everywhere. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, Emily felt familiar. She knew this rhythm. She had lived it in a different form for years. It was not pretty, and it was not polished, but it was survival. And she was good at survival. As they finished walking through the back office, a younger woman with tired eyes and a headset hanging from one ear approached, clearly stressed. "We are missing next week's schedule. HR never sent it over, and half the staff thinks they are not even on the roster." Emily glanced at the disorganized pile of printed rosters taped to the wall. "Schedules manually? You guys are doing?" "Yeah." The woman sighed. "The automated system crashes half the time. No one has fixed it." Emily stepped closer, scanning the sheets. "No wonder. You are cross-scheduling people who have conflicting availability. Whoever is inputting this doesn't actually check the real-time constraints." The woman blinked. How did you see that?" "It is the same thing I do when figuring out how to get my kid to school, pick up an extra shift. And still make it to the grocery store before it closes," Emily said, a dry smile tugging at her lips. "Different stakes. Same math." Alexander watched, arms crossed, eyes sharp but pleased. "You are seeing what I saw." "I am seeing a mess," Emily replied honestly. "But not an unsolvable one." They returned to the front entrance, the noise subsiding just slightly as the afternoon lull set in. As Alexander opened the door for her, Emily stepped outside, the cool air hitting her like a reminder of the real world waiting beyond. "Still think this is crazy?" he asked, turning toward her. "Definitely," she answered. "But I do not think it is impossible anymore." For a moment, they stood in silence, the city bustling around them, two people from completely different worlds, both knowing without saying that this was not just a job interview anymore. This was something bigger. Something neither of them quite understood yet, but both were beginning to believe in. The morning sun filtered weakly through the grimy windows of Emily's apartment, its golden hue doing little to soften the sharp edges of her anxiety. She woke to the sound of Noah's ragged cough echoing down the hallway, followed by the soft padding of his small feet as he shuffled into her room, clutching his blanket to his chest. His cheeks were flushed with fever, and his eyes looked heavy with exhaustion. "Mommy, I don't feel good," he mumbled, climbing into bed beside her. Her heart clenched. Of all days, why today? The very day she was meant to prove to herself, to Alexander, and to the universe that she was capable of stepping beyond the boundaries life had boxed her into. She pressed the back of her hand to Noah's forehead, hot. Much too hot. She scrambled from bed, mind already racing through solutions. Mrs. Jenkins, her elderly neighbor who usually watched Noah, was visiting her daughter out of state. The other teenager she occasionally paid to babysit at school. There was no one else. No family, no backup plan. Her life had never allowed for backup plans. She paced the kitchen, alternating between making toast for Noah and scrolling frantically through her phone for anyone who might be able to help. One by one, the texts came back. Busy, at work, unavailable. Her chest tightened. Canceling now would confirm everything that cruel little voice in the back of her mind had always whispered, "You are not meant for this world. You do not belong in their rooms. You are destined to stay exactly where you are." She set Noah up on the couch with his favorite blanket, cartoons playing softly, a thermometer, and a bottle of children's fever medicine on the coffee table within reach. Kissing his forehead, she whispered, "I won't be long, buddy. I'll be back before you know it." But even as the words left her lips, guilt gnawed at her. No part of this felt right. Throwing on the same blouse and slacks she had worn to the branch visit, she stuffed her worn resume into a folder, grabbed her bag, and bolted out the door. Her sneakers slapped against the pavement as she half ran to the nearest bus stop, praying that nothing else would go wrong. But the city was not in the mood to show mercy. The bus she needed broke down halfway to Midtown, forcing her to jump off and sprint several blocks to the nearest subway station. The train was delayed. When it finally arrived, it stopped mid-route for 10 agonizing minutes because of a signal failure. Her hands trembled as she checked the time on her cracked phone screen, already 15 minutes late. Panic clamped around her throat as the train finally lurched forward. When it screeched to a stop at her station, she bolted up the stairs, weaving through the crowded sidewalk, breath coming in ragged gasps. When she burst into Reed Tech's towering lobby, she didn't pause to compose herself. She rushed straight to the reception desk, winded and disheveled, her hair clinging to her forehead from the humid rush through the subway tunnels. I have an interview," she panted. "Emily Carter. I'm late, but I'm here." The receptionist, a different woman from the one she had dealt with before, scanned her computer, frowning. "There's no interview scheduled under that name." Emily's heart plummeted. "No. That can't be right. Claire, Mr. Reed's assistant, she scheduled it. 2 o'clock. I confirmed. I don't have anything here." The receptionist replied, her tone clipped, already turning her attention back to her screen. "If you weren't properly scheduled, there's nothing I can do." Desperation surged like a tidal wave. "Can you call her? Claire. She's in meetings all day." "I can't." "Then Alexander Reed. Call his office. Please." The woman's gaze hardened. "I don't just call the CEO for walk-ins. I'm not a walk-in." Emily snapped, louder than she intended. Heads turned. Embarrassment burned her skin, but the panic overrode it. I had an interview. I was invited." The receptionist crossed her arms. "If you weren't formally scheduled, I can't help you." Emily stood there, shaking, humiliated, unsure whether to scream, cry, or simply disappear into the marble floor. Her lungs felt too small for the air her body needed. Every eye in the lobby seemed fixed on her, the woman who didn't belong, the woman who clearly didn't know the rules of this world. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as she spun away from the desk, blinking back furious tears. This was it. This was the confirmation of every fear that had gnawed at her since the moment Alexander handed her that folder. She didn't belong here. She was foolish to believe she could cross the invisible line that divided people like her from people like him. As she stumbled toward the exit, her shoulder collided hard with someone stepping out of the elevator. "Whoa, careful," a familiar voice said, steady and warm. Her head jerked up. Alexander. His brows furrowed the moment he saw her, flushed, breathless, eyes wild with panic. What's wrong?" "Emily. The dam broke. They said I wasn't on the schedule. The receptionist wouldn't let me up. I'm late. Noah's sick. The bus broke down. The train was delayed. Everything went wrong." Alexander's eyes snapped toward the reception desk, his jaw tightening. "Wait here." He strode over with the kind of energy that made the air shift. His voice was low, firm, but not loud, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. Within seconds, the receptionist's demeanor transformed, all defensiveness crumbling into nervous professionalism. Whatever he said made her cheeks flush as she fumbled with her keyboard, nodding quickly. When he returned, his gaze softened as it met hers. "Come with me." Still trembling, Emily followed him to the elevator. The doors closed, sealing them into a quiet pocket away from the prying eyes of the lobby. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick with tension, but not anger, something else. Something heavier. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. "I tried. I really tried." "Emily." Alexander interrupted gently, turning toward her. "This isn't your fault." Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she fought them back with every ounce of stubborn pride she had left. "It feels like the universe is screaming at me to stay in my lane." He stepped closer, not invading her space but grounding it. "No. The universe threw every obstacle it could because it knows you're a threat to the rules it built. People like you weren't supposed to make it here. And yet, here you are." Her chest tightened. "But I'm late. They won't take me seriously." "They will," he said firmly. "Because I'm not letting them write you off." As the elevator doors opened, his hand hovered briefly at her back, not touching, not forcing, but offering support without words. They stepped out together, side by side, toward the meeting room waiting down the hall. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence inside the conference room was suffocating. Walls of frosted glass stood like barriers against the chaos of the world beyond. A polished oak table stretched the length of the room, lined with sleek black chairs. At the far end, a large digital display pulsed softly with the Reed Tech logo, waiting for the presentation that should have started 15 minutes ago. But there was no presentation. There were no polite greetings or standard interview pleasantries. Instead, there was only the heavy weight of expectation pressing down on Emily as she sat alone on one side of the table. Alexander sat across from her, his posture relaxed in contrast to her stiff, nervous frame. His eyes, however, were anything but relaxed. They were focused, studying her in a way that felt far more intimate than professional. Not invasive, but deliberate, as if he were reading every flicker of doubt, every tremor in her hands, every thought she struggled to suppress. Between them, a file lay open, her resume. A thin document, unimpressive by conventional standards. 2 pages listing jobs like cashier, house cleaner, waitress, night shift stalker, and a brief line about a community college education she had been forced to abandon years ago, when life demanded something different from her. No accolades. No degrees. No corporate achievements. But it was not her resume Alexander was studying. It was her. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Hardest thing you've ever had to figure out?" "Emily, tell me something." "What's the question threw her off. She blinked, mouth parting, but no words immediately followed. It wasn't a question about her work history or her availability. It wasn't even framed like an interview question. It was something deeper. That's not what I expected you to ask," she admitted, hands tightening in her lap. "I know," Alexander replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Anyway. But answer." She exhaled slowly, staring down at her hands. "It's everything. Every day is the hardest thing I've ever had to figure out. Waking up knowing that if I miss one bus, if Noah gets sick, if one paycheck is late, it all collapses. It's trying to plan a future when you're barely surviving the present. There's no room for mistakes. No safety net." His eyes softened but remained steady. "So you operate with high stakes every day?" She nodded. "Yeah. I do." He sat back, tapping a finger against the edge of the table. That lobby downstairs wouldn't last a week in your shoes. You know, most people sitting in. Her laugh was dry, humorless. Most days, I don't think I'll last a week in my shoes. But the tension shifted. The air became less oppressive, less formal. The lines between interviewer and interviewee blurred as Alexander closed the file entirely, pushing it aside like it no longer mattered. "Tell me," he said. "About when you were handling inventory at the cafe." Emily blinked, confused but answering anyway. "We didn't have a formal system. Everything was manual. Supplies would come in, and half the time it wouldn't match the orders. I had to figure out how to stretch ingredients when deliveries were late. You can't tell a customer they can't have coffee because someone forgot to order filters. And you fixed it?" Yeah. I started double-checking every order. Created my own little spreadsheet. Tracked usage. Figured out that the owner was over-ordering certain things and under-ordering others. Saved him probably a few $100 a month. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. "For that. And you didn't get a raise?" A bitter smile tugged at her lips. "Of course not. Did you get thanked?" She let out a sharp breath. "Not really." His gaze sharpened. "But you did it anyway. Because it needed to be done." "Exactly." His voice was quieter now but firmer, carrying a kind of weight that made her lift her gaze to meet his. "That's what people don't understand about jobs like yours. Or about people like you. You do it because if you don't, everything falls apart. You don't get to fail. You don't get to walk away." She swallowed, suddenly feeling exposed in a way that was terrifying and liberating all at once. "You know," Alexander continued, "when I was reviewing the problems at this branch, I realized the solution wasn't technical. It wasn't about software upgrades or process automation. It was about the right person leading. Someone who knows how to navigate chaos. Someone who knows what it means when there's no backup plan." A lump formed in her throat. That's not something people put on resumes." "No, it isn't." His smile softened. "But maybe it should be." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of realization. It was the first time anyone had looked at her life, her struggles, and called it a skill instead of a failure. Then, Alexander sat back, folding his arms. "I need you to understand something. If you accept this job, it won't be charity. It won't be a favor. It'll be because you are the most qualified person for it." Her breath caught. "But I don't have." "I know." He interrupted gently. "You don't have a degree. You don't have corporate experience. But you have something that can't be taught. You have the ability to hold things together when everything is falling apart. And that's exactly what this branch needs." Her hands trembled as she pressed them flat against the table, grounding herself. "Know what to say. I don't even say you'll think about it." He replied. "That's all." She nodded slowly, still stunned. "I'll think about it." As they stood, Alexander walked her to the elevator. The tension between them was different. Now, less formal, less about employer and applicant. There was something else, something unspoken yet undeniable. Something that neither of them dared name. As the elevator doors slid open, she stepped inside, glancing back at him one last time. "Emily," he said before the doors closed. "Done that just by surviving. You don't have to prove yourself to me. You've already." And then the doors shut, sealing her inside with 1,000 emotions battling in her chest: fear, disbelief, and for the first time in a very long time, a flicker of hope. The conference room on the top floor of Reed Tech's headquarters was nothing short of intimidating. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, while the polished walnut table gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lighting. Around the table sat members of the executive board, each dressed in impeccably tailored suits, their expressions carved from stone. They carried themselves with the weight of people who controlled decisions that could alter lives, companies, and futures with a single vote. Alexander stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared, his jaw set in a way that made it clear he wasn't here to ask for permission. His presence commanded attention, not because of arrogance, but because of the quiet certainty that came from years of leading without yielding. A digital presentation flickered behind him, displaying charts, projections, and performance reports from the struggling branch. Lines dipped dangerously low in some places, flatlined in others. The numbers were brutal, and the tension in the room was thicker than the polished walls could contain. "We have two options," Alexander began, his voice even but firm. "We either shut down the Midtown branch permanently, absorbing the losses into next quarter and reallocating assets. Or we execute an immediate leadership overhaul, apply structural changes, and attempt a turnaround." An older man near the center, gray-haired with rimless glasses, folded his arms. "With respect, Alexander, this branch has been bleeding money for 12 consecutive months. We've already attempted structural adjustments twice. Your proposal isn't a strategy. It's a gamble." A woman 3 seats down chimed in, her nails clicking against her tablet as she scrolled. "And your suggestion for leadership replacement is unorthodox, to say the through the data least." Alexander met her gaze without flinching. "Emily Carter has first-hand operational experience managing high-pressure, low-resource environments." The room stirred with murmurs of disapproval. "She doesn't have a degree," someone stated bluntly. "She has no formal management experience," another added. "Her resume is barely 2 pages. She worked as a waitress," one scoffed. "One of our corporate branches. And a janitor. How does that translate to managing?" Alexander's hands tightened around the edges of the table. He knew this would be the reaction. Knew that the polished, Ivy League pedigree of this room would recoil at the very idea of someone like Emily stepping into a leadership role. But he also knew something else. Something numbers couldn't capture, something no algorithm could predict. She has spent the last 7 years managing more complexity, more crisis, and more pressure than most people in this room have ever encountered. Alexander said, his tone sharpened by steel resolve. She has balanced resources where there were none. She has solved logistical problems with creativity most MBA graduates couldn't dream of. She has negotiated under pressure, managed crisis after crisis without backup, without safety nets. The gray-haired man leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Seriously suggesting that survival skills equate to corporate leadership? Alexander, be reasonable. Are you?" "I'm not suggesting it," Alexander replied coldly. "I'm stating it as fact. Because survival skills are leadership. She doesn't just survive chaos. She masters it. Every single day." A beat of silence passed before another voice cut in. "Shareholder interests, and brand reputation over, what? A gut feeling? You are jeopardizing company assets." Alexander's gaze swept across the room. "Not a gut feeling. A data point you refuse to quantify. Because it doesn't fit into your spreadsheet. Grit. Resilience. Adaptability. You don't value it. Because you've never needed it. But it's the exact reason this company exists in the first place. The room simmered with discomfort. No one liked being called out, especially not by their own CEO. The woman with the tablet sighed, pushing her hair behind her ear. Let's entertain this scenario. For a moment. Say we approve this. Say we let her try. If she fails, what then? We're looking at deeper losses, staff exodus, customer attrition. She won't fail. Alexander replied, voice lowering but gaining weight. Because failure isn't something she can afford. Unlike most candidates, failure isn't an inconvenience to her. It's not a career detour. It's not something she can shrug off and move on from. Failure for her means rent doesn't get paid. Her child doesn't eat. Lights get turned off. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. That, he continued, someone who can't, is the difference. You hire people who can afford to fail. I'm hiring. The gray-haired man pressed his fingers together, elbows resting on the table. This is reckless. No. Alexander snapped, his tone final. What's reckless is believing that the same strategies, the same types of candidates, the same recycled ideas will magically produce different results. We've tried that. It didn't work. Silence pressed in again. The air felt thick with judgment, uncertainty, and something else, the slow, creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Alexander straightened, letting the silence stretch until every eye was locked on him. I'm not asking for consensus, he said. I'm informing you of my decision. Effective immediately. Emily Carter will be appointed interim branch operations manager for Midtown. She will report directly to me. This isn't a request for approval. This is an executive directive. Gasps fluttered around the room. A few voices muttered objections, but none of them dared escalate further. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably the moment Alexander drew the line in the sand. You have the authority. The woman with the tablet admitted reluctantly. On you. But if this backfires, I'll own it. Alexander said without hesitation. Fully. With that, he closed the laptop in front of him, signaling the end of the meeting. Chairs scraped against the floor as board members began to rise, some shaking their heads, others glancing at one another with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Alexander remained still for a moment, watching them file out. Only when the last executive disappeared behind the glass doors did he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands loosened. His shoulders dropped slightly. But beneath it all, a current of certainty remained, strong and steady. Because for all their doubts, for all their degrees and titles, none of them understood what he understood now. Emily Carter was not just a gamble. She was the future. The Midtown branch looked different when Emily arrived the next morning. It wasn't the building itself, still the same chipped paint around the doorframe, still the same flickering overhead lights and scuffed floors, but something intangible had shifted. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Emily wasn't walking into a job to beg for hours, to fight for scraps, or to prove her worth to people who had no intention of ever seeing it. She was walking in as the one in charge. Her fingers gripped the keycard Alexander had handed her less than 12 hours ago. It still felt alien in her hand, sleek, official, marked with her name and the words interim branch operations manager. A title she had never dared to imagine. As the door clicked open, the usual sounds of chaos greeted her. Phones ringing. Staff arguing. Customers complaining. A printer jam screeching like a wounded animal. And yet, beneath the noise, there was a subtle change, the way heads turned toward her, the way conversations faltered mid-sentence, as if the presence of someone new, someone different, had disrupted the broken rhythm they'd all come to accept. The first to approach her was Mia, the overworked assistant manager whose headset seemed permanently fused to her ear. Her eyes were wide with confusion but edged with something else, hope, maybe, or just sheer curiosity. Can I help you?" Mia asked cautiously. Emily offered a small smile. "Yeah. I'm Emily Carter. Your new branch manager." The words felt strange in her mouth, but satisfying. Mia blinked. "Wait, seriously?" "Seriously." The tension shifted instantly. Other employees exchanged glances, some skeptical, others cautiously optimistic, and a few plainly shocked. No one had told them this was happening. No memos, no warning. Just a new face walking in like she owned the place, which, in a way, she now did. "Gather everyone," Emily said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Right now. We're having a meeting." Mia nodded, still processing, but her body went into motion. Within minutes, the dozen or so staff members trickled into the break room, some curious, some annoyed, most just exhausted. Emily stood at the front, hands steady despite the storm of nerves pounding in her chest. She scanned the faces in front of her, young, old, jaded, frustrated. People who had been fighting the same losing battle for far too long without anyone bothering to care. "My name is Emily Carter," she began, her voice firm but calm. "I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm not here to yell. I'm not here to pretend I know everything about how this company runs. But I do know this place is broken. And I know that's not your fault." A ripple of surprise passed through the group. Several employees shifted in their seats, visibly relaxing. Others folded their arms, waiting for the catch. What's broken is the system. The processes. The leadership, until now. What's not broken is you. You've been holding this place together with duct tape and sheer force of will, and no one has given you the tools to succeed. That changes today. Mia stared at her like she was witnessing something impossible. "I've been where you are," Emily continued. "I know what it's like to work double shifts without thanks. To fix problems that shouldn't exist in the first place. To get blamed for things you can't control. But I also know how to fix it. Not overnight. Not magically. But together." A man near the back, Rick, based on his name tag, raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Step 1. Emily said without hesitation. "We stop the bleeding. Effective immediately, no one works mandatory overtime without choice. If something's broken, we document it. No more ignoring problems until they explode. Scheduling. We overhaul it. Customer complaints. We address them within 24 hours, not a week." A younger employee scoffed. "Easy to say. We've heard that before." "Fair." Emily nodded. "So here's the difference. I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm asking you to give me 1 week. 1 week to prove I'm not another ghost manager who disappears when things get hard." Silence held. No one rushed to agree. But no one walked out, either. "All right," Rick said after a long beat, crossing his arms. 1 week. Murmurs of agreement followed, hesitant but real. The moment the meeting ended, Emily dove headfirst into the mess. She started with the scheduling system. Hours were scattered, double-booked, or left empty entirely because the software hadn't been updated in months. She pulled Mia aside and together they pored over the spreadsheets, cross-checking employee availability, cutting inefficient shifts, and redistributing hours based on actual need rather than some broken template. By noon, the lines at the front desk had shortened. Not gone, but shorter. Emily rotated the front desk staff with people from the back office who had customer service experience but had been buried in paperwork unnecessarily. The phone system was next. She discovered the voicemail inbox had been full for 3 weeks. Meaning no new messages were even being recorded. She cleared the backlog herself, writing down every unresolved customer issue and assigning them as tasks to staff members based on skill rather than random availability. Mid-afternoon, a delivery arrived with the wrong inventory. Instead of accepting it blindly as had become the habit, Emily stopped the driver, cross-referenced the manifest, and refused the items they hadn't ordered, saving the branch over $800 in misplaced stock. By 5 o'clock, something was happening that no one expected. Customers were no longer shouting. Phones were ringing, but getting answered. Staff were still exhausted, but now, at least, they weren't drowning. Not entirely. Near closing, Alexander walked in, observing quietly from the entrance. His gaze scanned the floor, the reduced lines, the coordinated staff, the noticeable absence of chaos. Emily noticed him, offered a quick nod, but didn't stop what she was doing. She was knee-deep in recalibrating the refund process with Mia, figuring out why tickets were disappearing from the customer service queue. Alexander didn't interrupt. He just watched. Watched as Emily moved through the space, not like someone pretending to be a manager, but like someone who had already become one. When the last customer left and the doors were locked for the day, the staff stood around the front counter, collectively stunned by what had just transpired. That was the smoothest day we've had in months. Rick muttered, almost afraid to believe it. Emily smiled, pushing a stray hair behind her ear. It's a start. Alexander stepped forward then, hands in his pockets, wearing the smallest trace of a smile. No. It's more than that. Everyone turned, realizing for the first time the CEO had been standing there. It's proof. Alexander said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. The difference. That the right person makes all. For the first time in years, Emily stood in a room full of people, not as the invisible one in the background, not as the struggling single mother no one noticed, but as someone who mattered. Someone who led. Someone who had already started changing the story. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of constant motion, endless problem-solving, and a relentless parade of obstacles that seemed determined to break her. But Emily refused to let them. The first few days tested every fiber of her patience and resilience. Systems that should have been automatic failed repeatedly, supply chains frayed at the seams, and every time one problem was patched, another appeared like clockwork. But Emily had never been a stranger to chaos. Chaos was her native language. She learned the rhythms of the branch quickly. By the end of the first week, she knew which employees thrived under pressure and which crumbled. She recognized that Rick, who had initially met her with skepticism, had an uncanny ability to spot patterns in customer complaints and prevent problems before they escalated. Mia, overworked and underappreciated, wasn't just an assistant manager, she was the glue that had kept this place from collapsing entirely. Emily began pulling staff into meetings twice a day, short, focused, tactical. No corporate buzzwords. No pointless slideshows. Just real talk. What's broken? Who needs help? What do we fix first? She listened. Really listened. For the first time, employees had a voice that mattered. The first priority became the customer service bottleneck. Emily overhauled the refund policy, eliminating archaic steps that had frustrated customers and employees alike. She simplified forms, retrained the frontline staff, and created a clear escalation path that didn't end in a voicemail abyss. With the help of Mia, she introduced a visible task board in the break room, something simple, yet revolutionary. Every major problem was listed in one column. Assigned staff were in the next. Completed tasks were marked off with bright green stickers. It was tactile, visible, and, most importantly, empowering. People started competing to see who could clear the most tasks. Each day, inventory management was next. Emily discovered the branch was hemorrhaging money due to redundant orders and misplaced stock. She created a simple tracking spreadsheet, not fancy software, just something accurate and functional. She negotiated directly with suppliers, cutting deals that corporate had either overlooked or deemed too small to matter. The result was immediate. Supply costs dropped by nearly 20% within the first 10 days. Staff morale shifted in ways she hadn't dared to imagine. People started showing up on time. Not because they were scared of being written up, but because they wanted to be part of what was happening. Employees who had been checked out for months now asked how they could help beyond their usual roles. Laughter, something completely foreign to this branch before, began to fill the air between customers. Even the customers noticed. Regulars started commenting. Said while picking up his repaired device, "Feels different in here." One man. Quieter. Less crazy. Emily smiled every time she heard it. Because she knew it wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was work. Hard, focused, relentless work from people who finally had someone willing to lead them, instead of just manage them. But the transformation wasn't without resistance. About 2 weeks into her tenure, one of the longest-serving employees, Mark, openly challenged her changes. Mid-shift, in front of staff and customers alike, he folded his arms and said, "Look, this isn't how we've done things. You're making a mess. These systems won't hold. We've seen new managers come and go before." Emily met his gaze without flinching. Point. What used to be wasn't working. You're right. This isn't how things used to be. That's the... He scoffed, shaking his head. We'll see. And they did see. By the end of that same week, customer complaints had dropped by 35%. Return customers had increased. Online reviews, which had been a cesspool of 1-star rants, started tipping toward 3 and 4 stars, with the occasional 5-star sprinkled in from customers shocked at the sudden turnaround. But numbers weren't the only marker of change. Emily began offering one-on-one check-ins with every staff member. She wanted to know their goals, not just for the branch but for themselves. For Mia, it was simple: I want someone to finally see that I can lead. For Rick, I just want to do my job without everything falling apart around me. For the younger staff, like Jenna and Luis, it was college ambitions, saving for their own apartments, building a life. Emily listened, then took action. She advocated for raises where justified. She restructured workloads to match skills instead of just filling gaps. When Jenna mentioned struggling with transportation, Emily rearranged the schedule to accommodate her commute. When Luis talked about wanting to learn more technical skills, Emily assigned him shadowing hours with the tech repair staff. She didn't have a degree in management. She didn't need one. What she had was lived experience, knowing exactly what it felt like to be invisible in a broken system, and knowing exactly how much it meant when someone saw you, really saw you. Even Alexander noticed the shift. He stopped by more frequently now, not as the looming presence of upper management but as a quiet observer, occasionally jumping in to help troubleshoot a workflow problem or suggesting a resource Emily hadn't thought of. But mostly, he watched her. Watched how she moved through the space like it belonged to her. How she led not with fear but with clarity. How people responded to her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One evening, as the branch closed and Emily sat cross-legged on the floor with Mia, taping up a new shift schedule, Alexander lingered by the door. "You realize," he said, leaning against the frame. "2 managers did in 2 years. You've done more in 3 weeks than the last." Emily snorted. "I didn't do it alone." "No." He agreed. "But you made it possible." She looked up at him, suddenly aware of the depth in his gaze, not just admiration, but something warmer, softer, more personal than either of them had dared acknowledge until now. "It's still not perfect," she said, brushing hair from her face. "Nothing worth doing ever is," he replied. And in that moment, surrounded by paperwork, tape, and a staff that finally believed in something again, Emily realized that the transformation happening wasn't just about a failing branch coming back to life. It was about her. About a woman who had spent her entire life being told she wasn't enough. A woman who had believed, even if she wouldn't admit it out loud, that the world was never going to let her be more than a background character. But not anymore. She was no one's background character now. She was the one leading the story. 3 months passed like a blink and yet felt like a lifetime. The Midtown branch, once known throughout the company as the disaster no one wanted to touch, was now something else entirely. The waiting lines that had once stretched out the door were gone. Customer satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. The once chaotic phone lines now ran with efficiency. Staff turnover dropped to nearly zero. Complaints that used to flood the corporate inbox became rare, replaced by messages praising the staff for their friendliness, their speed, and their willingness to help. Inside the branch, the transformation wasn't just visible in the numbers or the systems, it was in the people. Rick, once the most cynical voice in the room, now took pride in mentoring the newer employees. Mia, whose talents had gone unnoticed for far too long, was being considered for a corporate-level operations role thanks to the leadership she had demonstrated. Alongside Emily, Jenna was enrolled in night classes, supported by a flexible schedule Emily fought to implement for her. Louise had started leading technical workshops for both staff and customers. Even the physical space reflected the change. The walls, once faded and cracked, were freshly painted. The cluttered front desk was now organized and welcoming. There were potted plants, real ones. Small touches, yes, but together they told a story. This was no longer a place people tolerated. It was a place where they thrived. On the financial side, the turnaround was undeniable. Revenue was up by 40%. Operational costs were down by nearly 25%. The branch was no longer a liability. It was a model. And at the center of it all stood Emily Carter. She stood taller now, not physically, but in presence. Her steps carried certainty. Her voice, once hesitant, now commanded attention, not with volume but with clarity and confidence. People listened to her not out of obligation but because they trusted her. She had become the kind of leader others dreamed of working under. The recognition reached corporate faster than Emily expected. Within a week of the third month performance review, she received an invitation to present her strategies at the quarterly executive meeting, a meeting where she would stand in the same room that had once debated whether she was even worthy of the job. When the day arrived, Emily walked into that boardroom not as the struggling single mom who had once fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder, but as the woman who had redefined what leadership meant inside one of the city's most competitive companies. She laid out her methods with precision. She didn't use jargon. No slides full of buzzwords. Just the truth. This isn't a story about a miracle, she said, looking each board member in the eye. It's about listening to the people who already know what's broken. It's about trusting the solutions that come from those on the ground, not just those in offices like this. When she finished, the silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was thoughtful. Reflective. For once, they were listening. When she stepped out of the room, Alexander was waiting. His smile was not the polished one of a CEO closing a deal. It was something warmer, something real. "You were brilliant," he said quietly. "I didn't do it for them," Emily replied. "Fight for them. I did it for my team. For the people who never had anyone." "I know." Alexander nodded. "That's why it worked." They stood there for a moment in the quiet hum of the corridor. Neither said what was increasingly obvious, that what had started as an accident, a chance encounter on a crowded bus, had grown into something neither of them had expected. It wasn't just about the job anymore. Not just about survival. It was about possibility. It was about how two worlds, never meant to collide, somehow did, and neither had been the same since. As the next few weeks unfolded, the offers came. Not just a formal promotion, Emily was offered a senior operations role overseeing multiple branches. It was a job that came with financial security she had never dared dream of. Health benefits. A retirement plan. Stability. For the first time in years, the question wasn't how she would make rent, but what school Noah might attend in the fall. Whether they could move into a neighborhood with a park nearby. Whether they might, for the first time, live without the constant threat of everything falling apart. On a crisp Friday evening, Emily stood outside the Midtown branch watching the sunset over the city skyline. Noah stood beside her, holding her hand, his face tilted toward the fading light. He was smiling, carefree in a way she hadn't seen since he was a toddler. Alexander arrived moments later, dressed not in a suit, but in jeans and a simple jacket. Casual. Present. Not the CEO of a tech giant, but simply a man showing up because he wanted to. Noah grinned when he saw him. "Mr. Alexander." "Hey, buddy," Alexander said, ruffling his hair with a grin. "How's school?" "Good. I got a star today for my math test." Alexander winked. "Knew you would." As the three of them walked toward the park down the street, something settled between them. Not the rushed, chaotic urgency that had defined so much of Emily's life until now, but something gentler. Solid. The knowledge that the future, uncertain as it always was, no longer felt like a fight to survive. It felt like something open. Something hopeful. "Do you ever think about that day?" Emily asked, her voice quiet as they walked. "How everything started there. The bus. All the time." Alexander replied, glancing sideways at her with a smile that reached his eyes. "Think about what would have happened if I'd gotten off at the next stop instead. If you'd chosen a different seat. She chuckled softly. "If I hadn't fallen asleep on your shoulder. Best nap of my life." He grinned. She laughed then, fully, the sound lifting into the air like something newly free. And in that laughter was the acknowledgement of everything they'd survived. Everything they'd built. Everything that was still waiting ahead. As they reached the park, Noah darted toward the swings, his laughter echoing into the dusk. Emily stood beside Alexander, their shoulders brushing, watching the boy who had been the reason for every fight, every tear, every sacrifice. Her fingers found his, tentative at first, then certain as they twined together. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. It was earned. And it had all begun with a single, accidental moment on an ordinary bus, proof that sometimes, the smallest collisions could change everything. Forever.